this is an incredibly important, special, exciting, and somewhat unknown garden, and that you're all not all going to discover, because I know some of you know where we're going, but it is probably one of the most important gardens in the early 20th century in this country, and you're all going to discover why, which is wonderful. So I'd like to introduce Rebecca Lemonius, who is our lovely guest today, and Rebecca lives at Longbarn. And just to, for those of you who are, you know, in far-flung places, just to sort of give you an idea geographically where I'm talking about, Longbarn is situated in Sevenoaks Weald, which is a tiny little village on the edge of Sevenoaks, which is sort of just about, not quite, is it about an hour south of London, I'd say.
Quite a bit less than that.
Yeah, less than an hour out of London. So it's just into the county of Kent, which we know to be the Garden of England. It's a very beautiful county. So I'd like to introduce Rebecca. Are you there, Rebecca?
I'm there. I'm here. Yeah.
Lovely.
Hello, everybody.
Lovely to see you. And just to say, Rebecca and I met, gosh, I can't remember how many years ago now, but we ended up sitting next to each other at a dinner table, lunch table at Gravetime Manor, didn't we?
That's right.
And
yeah.
It was, I think it was
Fergus.
That's right. Yeah. It was a talk for Fergus, and I think we were put on the people who come on their own table. So we sat next to each other, and that's how we met. Get to know the garden, and we've worked on various crazy little projects together, and we've also shared, or Rebecca very kindly let us use the garden for college projects for my diploma students, which was very exciting. So Rebecca, I'm going to let you go over to you now so that you can talk to everybody about the garden, and as we go through, if there are things that I think you know we ought to highlight, I might say, but
do just interrupt me. Yeah.
But also, just to remind everybody viewing, especially if there are new people out there, that there is a chat box at the bottom of the screen. So if you have a particular question as we go through, and it's pertinent to sort of something you're just looking at, please type in the question, and we'll make sure that Rebecca gets that, or we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. So Rebecca, do you want to sort of do the screen sharing?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to do the screen share, and I hope I'm not going to lose everybody in some sort of drama.
No, it all worked beautifully before, so why should it?
Yeah. Okay, right. First of all, actually, before I get going, I'd just like to say thank you, Annie and Noel. It's such a pleasure to be part of the Garden Masterclass Lockdown Initiative, and I've really enjoyed lots of the talks so far, and virtual visiting is definitely the next best thing to actual visiting. So thank you very much for what you guys have put together. Today, we're going to visit Longbarn, which is where I live with my family. And Longbarn is now a Grade 2 star listed house and one of the few private listed gardens in the UK. But first and foremost, it is, and always has been, a family home. Now, if you were actually visiting, this would be the first thing that you'd see. We do some garden tours and charity events every year, and we love sharing the garden. In fact, it would feel more than a bit ridiculous to put in the work that we do if we didn't share it. But it isn't widely advertised, so you're coming on a secret tour, which is a little surprising given who created it and the huge following that Vita and Sissinghurst have. Now, 2 people created this garden, not just one, and their partnership was essential to the outcome. Here they are in their handsome glory, Vicie Sackville-West and Haroldzie Nickolsonie. The story of Longbarn's gardens naturally begins with their early marriage, although the house is much older, dating back to 1390. And it never ceases to amaze me how much has been written about and how much is known about Vita and Harold. But fortunately for us, they were prolific letter writers, and over 10,000 of their letters to each other have survived. After 18 months of courtship, the couple married in the chapel at Knowle in 1913, when Vita had the tender age of 21. Their marriage wasn't actually wholly approved of by Vita's parents on account of Harold apparently being penniless, but this didn't put Vita off. Harold's diplomatic career was embryonic, and as 3rd secretary to the British Embassy, he took his new wife abroad to Constantinople. And I picked this image of Vita, because there are obviously quite a few, but I picked this one because I think it shows perfectly why this was the first and last time this fiercely independent woman played the dutiful diplomat's wife. So Vita grew up at Knoll, a spectacular and enormous Elizabethan palace, described by Vita in Knoll and the Sackvilles as a jumbled village upon a hillside. It's about 4 acres of house. And in fact, sometimes it's called a calendar house, although apparently that's an inaccurate description. But a calendar house would have 52 staircases, 7 courtyards, and 365 rooms. So just to give you a sense of the enormity of where she grew up. She adored her childhood home and ran around its vast corridors and staterooms, untamed and often unchaperoned. She was an only child, but as a girl, she would never inherit her beloved ancestral seat. When she came back from Constantinople to have her first child, Ben, who was born in August 1914, I think that's when he was born, she set about looking for a marital home for her, Harold and the baby. And this is what she found. Now, whether she had doubts about her penniless marriage at this point, we shall never know. But her influential mother approved of the house and footed the bill at a princely sum of £2,500. Now, why did she buy this house? It was clearly in their price range, or their mother's price range. It had just been renovated with all the mod cons, including an extra bathroom at Vita's request, and it was near Vita's beloved Knoll. And last but not least, it had a history, albeit an unproven one. So the local press was absolutely convinced that this was the birthplace of William Caxton, and they wrote about it a lot. There were even postcards to prove the story. We all learnt about him at primary school, although I think they learn about Tim Berners-Lee now. And as the man who brought the first printing press to England in the 15th century, his appeal to Vita, the aspiring writer and poet, would not have been insignificant. To have a house with at least some history after growing up at Knoll must have been a bonus. And I also think Vita had a sixth sense for places. She found Longbarn, and 15 years later, she found Sissinghurst. Neither had any garden to speak of, and the latter was an uninhabitable ruin. But she had imagination in bucket loads, and she saw potential. They bought the house in March 1915, and it was to be their main family home until 1930, when they bought Sissinghurst. But they didn't sell Longbarn until 1945. Somewhat ambitiously, after a few months, they planned and arranged the moving and reconstruction of a 5-bay 16th century timber frame barn, attaching it to the original house to form the L shape that exists today, making the existing terrace a central feature. They left the downstairs as one huge room. I imagine the ancient cottage feeling claustrophobic to Vita after the enormity of Knoll, and this construction was a bit of an antidote to that. The whole project is all the more remarkable given the fact that World War I was in full swing and Vita had tragically lost a baby at full term. It can't have been an easy year for the young mother. Even the addition of the barn didn't satisfy Vita's long legs and need for space, and the garden was begun. I sometimes wonder why they created what was ultimately 3 acres of garden, but presumably if you grow up in 4 acres of house, 3 acres of garden isn't such a big thing. Vita could create limitless rooms outside. She carried out a significant part of the garden construction herself, much to the alarm of her mother. Building pillars and steps with the boys, they even carved the names of various dogs into cement on top of one of the pillars, and that's still there today. Vita's mother was so alarmed by her penchant for menial work that she paid for her to have a gardener. Unfortunately, my mum doesn't share her concerns. My mum, I think you're there somewhere. And here she is, Vita's mother, not my mum, admiring some of the work she's paying for. Vita's mother, or bonne maman, as she was fondly called, was a dominant force in Vita's life, not least because she often held the purse strings. The Sackville-West fortune was all tied up with the estate of Knoll, but bonne maman was nothing if not resourceful, running a successful business and having a string of lucrative affairs. She was capricious, difficult, and at times positively unhinged, but always there. Bonne maman was not the only woman in Vita's life, as we well know. In fact, there were quite a few, but 2 had a particularly significant impact on Vita during her time at Longbarn. And here's the first. Of course, Violet Trefusis. as so spectacularly documented by Vita herself and published by her son Nigel Nicholson in Portrait of a Marriage. Vita had known Violet since childhood, and Violet herself was the daughter of the King's mistress, Alice Keppel, and incidentally Camilla Parker Bowles' great aunt. Their tempestuous affair took off in April 1918. World War I was still raging. Nigel was 15 months old and Ben was approaching 4. And for the next 2 years, on and off, Vita and Violet ran away together, bon maman stepping in to look after the boys on numerous occasions, until finally she and the ladies' husbands had had enough. Harold and Dennis took off in a 2-seater airplane. Imagine how exciting, not to mention dangerous, that must have been in 1920, to put a stop to the whole affair. In truth, I suspect Vita was by now looking for a way out, fidelity not being her strong point, and the obliging Harold provided it. She returned to him, Longbarn, and her boys. Then in 1922, Vita met Virginia Woolf, and here is Virginia at Longbarn on the left, looking slightly poorly and frail after one of her bouts of illness. Their friendship, born out of Vita's immense admiration of Virginia's intellect and writing, and Virginia's admiration of Vita's sheer life force, grew slowly into a love affair, which reached its peak between 1925 and 1928, waning after Virginia's bestseller, Orlando, was published. Nigel Nicholson, Vita's son, described Orlando as the longest and most charming love letter in literature. Its main protagonist bounds through centuries, ambiguously changes gender, and has a striking resemblance to Vita. Interestingly, Vita catalogued all her correspondence with Virginia, presumably with an eye on her own significance in the life of this literary genius. But the key stabilising figure in Vita's life throughout this adventurous time was, of course, Harold. And here he is, looking like an unlikely axe wielder. I love the incongruousness of this image. There's a lovely letter from Vita to Harold, written after she dropped him at a station and drove back to Longbarn. She writes of seeing coffee cups along the roadside on the way home, and finally on the terrace. I have to admit, when I first read this, I was thinking, coffee cups? That's Starbucks. We're in the 1920s. What's this all about? But actually, coffee cups was their little code word for memorable places and memorable things. She missed him already, and the ultimate coffee cup was when she saw a basket of rose petals that Harold had picked and left on the terrace. Here's Vita back home on the terrace with one of her beloved dogs. Vita finished her epic award-winning pastoral poem, The Land. She wrote most of it while she was living here, and she finished it while she was visiting Harold in Tehran, and it was published in 1926. My favourite section is the one about Weald and Clay, because I deal with a lot of Weald and Clay. And it's proper first-hand proof that Vita herself dug in the garden here at Longbarn, but maybe not wearing that dress. The 1920s were a sociable time for the Nicholsons, not least when the Bloomsburys, or Gloomsburys as Vita nicknamed them, came to tea. In the middle is the very solid rustic bench and table that Vita's sitting on in the last photo, but the rest of the furniture looks very much like it was pinched from the attics at Knoll, and certainly didn't live outside. In fact, I suspect it lived in the big room. I think in this picture we've actually got Raymond Mortimer, and I think that's Edward Knobloch, who wrote Kismet. And there's a whole series of these photographs that they must have had a photographer there when they were having tea. And they're in the National Archives, and Lady Ottoline Morell and various other Bloomsbury figures are also there. So there's the furniture, which I think came out of the big room. And now I'm going to show you the big room as it was when Vita lived here. So this is the room that was at the bottom of the barn. So there it is in its glory. It's lined with books, very much like the big room at Sissinghurst. And there's a huge eclectic mix of strange furniture going on. And you can just make out the beautiful door at the back. I don't know when the photo is exactly from, and I don't know when the door was made, but it has a distinctly Persian feel. Between 1925 and 1927, Harold was largely based in Tehran, and Vita went out to visit him, leading to, in my opinion, 2 of her best books, Passenger to Tehran and 12 Days. She adored the exotic, although I do wonder whether her travels lived up to her huge romantic expectations. In Passenger to Tehran, she writes, "To hope for paradise is to live in paradise, a very different thing to actually getting there. And here's the door as it looks outside today. So their lives were busy, adventurous, sociable, peppered with hard work, and their garden at Longbarn was their solace, a place where the dramas of Vita's affairs and Harold's sometimes difficult diplomatic work, which bored Vita, could be pushed aside, and the couple had truly common, complementary ground. Conveniently, when they moved into Longbarn, Bon Maman was having an affair with this man, Sir Edwin Lutyens. He advised them informally, and no doubt somewhat pompously looking at this photograph, on the design and layout inside as well as outside, although his starting point was apparently to advise the young couple to sell the house. I'm rather glad they didn't. Most notably, he solved a waterlogging problem at the bottom of the garden, advising Harold to build 6 raised beds so the plants didn't drown. In conversation with Lutyens, Harold drew up this plan on a scrap of paper. It was in fact Harold and not Vita who essentially designed the garden here and at Sissinghurst. The garden here grew organically as land acquisition and time allowed. He loved classical architecture and formal lines and created a framework for Vita to fill with her plants and passion. And here are the raised L-shaped beds back in the 1920s on the left and a couple of days ago on the right. They were rebuilt in the beginning of the 90s, and the brick still feels very new actually and a bit hard. So we've been planting lots of things to spill over the edges and soften them. And also over the last 3 years, we've been carrying out a renovation in all of them. We've got one more to go. And we've been digging them over and enriching the soil because it all become a little bit compacted and hungry. And everything, all the plants grow as if they're in a giant container because they won't put their roots into the sort of absolutely waterlogged clay in the winter. And I've got a lovely picture of Vita sitting on the corner of one of her new raised beds. Before returning to the design and layout of the garden, I'm going to canter through the history up to 1945, when Vita and Harold finally sold Longbarn to the film director Paul Soskin after owning it for 30 years. It took Vita and Harold 2 years to make Sissinghurst properly habitable, and then they rented Longbarn out. Initially, Sidney Bernstein of early film fame, and he entertained people like Charlie Chaplin here. He sort of used it as a weekend retreat and did want to buy it at one point, but Vita wouldn't sell it to him. Then in 1936, the Lindberghs moved in. They lived here with their family for almost 3 years, and Anne Morrow Lindbergh's diaries, The Flower and the Nettle, document their time here. In 1927, Charles Lindbergh had achieved instantaneous world fame by making the first non-stop flight from New York to Paris. And at the time, his fame was huge, and I once heard it compared to that of Princess Diana and Michael Jackson combined. Tragically, it was to lead to the kidnap for ransom and subsequent murder of their firstborn baby boy. The following trial and hounding by the press led them to flee America. It's a little like the reverse of Harry and Meghan. They sought respite here in the UK. And they were family friends of the Nicholsons. Harold had written a biography about Anne's father, and after searching all over the country, they were having lunch with Harold when he suggested they rent Longbarn, sending them down to see it and telling them that the house would jump all over them like a spaniel, as indeed it did. When they arrived, no one answered the door, so they walked round onto the terrace and instantly decided that this was where they needed to be. And in fact, they expanded their family here and called their little boy Land. And there he is. And in fact, if we just go back to that one, you can see he's rather spectacularly got his ears taped to his head. I'm guessing they must have stuck out a little bit. Maybe that was the solution back in the 30s. So there he is again, presumably still taped. Children featured throughout Longbarn's history. And in fact, during World War II, it was inundated with children when Vita and Harold handed it over to the war effort, and it housed refugee children from London, some of whom had been dug out of bombed homes. Rather fantastically in this image, you can see the yews growing up too. If you just look behind the children, they're getting bigger. And here the children are with a pile of toys in the corner and clothes being distributed. It's very striking how tiny they all are And in fact, in all the photographs, they all look like they're under 5. It's also slightly surprising that there isn't a weed in the terrace. I wonder if they sort of had a, I don't know, afternoon tea time activity of weeding the terrace, and that's why. Also got 2 lovely hand-coloured photographs, and the children on the left are lined up on the rock bank, and the ones on the right are standing outside the door that we just looked at with the L-shaped design on it. And here's the rock bank in spring earlier this year. So I'm just going to have a sip of cold tea. I think all keen gardeners learn how to drink cold tea. I'm going to take us back to the design of the garden. So this is a sketch plan of the garden as it was in Vita and Harold's time. It's in Vita's Other World by Jane Brown, a great book about the minds behind the creation of Longbarn and Sissinghurst. The land slopes steeply downhill, north to south, and there's handily a little compass in the corner there. And the terraces, and there are terraces to cope with that slope. And the terraces were created for that practical purpose of having a space that you could move around easily. And those terraces were essentially built by Vita and Harold. And I'm not too sure when they were finished, because of course they did move in during the First World War. But it was part of the design and layout of the garden as it grew. And these terraces led to the creation of separate rooms, because that's what naturally happens when you terrace something at different levels. Harold separated all these different areas with formal hedges and plants, and Vita stuffed, what he separated with hedges, and Vita stuffed it all with her beloved plants. Here I've taken the original plan and I've put it in the corner of a drone shot that my husband took at the weekend. So while I'm talking about the design, you can all do an analysis of what still exists, and you can look for my husband. It's the Longbarn version of Where's Wally? So if I use my cursor, the first obvious thing that you can see is the yews. There they all are, running straight down the middle of the garden, and you can see them on the plan as well. And they are dominant. You'll see from the photographs, as we go through the photographs of the garden, how the yews sort of seem to pop up in the background or foreground of every single photo. Harold designed the garden around a strong north-south and east-west axis with focal points at either end, and there's a repetitive theme of L shapes. So you've got the L shape of the house at the top, and the top lawn and what was the tennis court, now the rose garden, and they wrap around each other, as indeed the house wrapped its arms around Anne Morrow Lindbergh when she stood on the terrace for the first time. The L shapes then repeated down, lower down in the Dutch beds, where you've got your 6 L shapes down there, and that's reflected back on the door that we just looked at in the photographs. The statuary they had in the garden, and notably the blue iron gates at the front, all moved with them to Sissinghurst, and they've now been replaced by previous owners. I sort of started off with a slightly ambivalent attitude to some of the statuary, but I've become completely attached to it since living here, and I particularly love this little chap. And there are a few cherubs around the garden, and I'm very fond of them. It's fun to look at the old photographs and make comparisons to today. And here we have one of the boys in what looks like their Etonian school uniform. And on the right, that's the same view. And we've got a bench there now, not an Etonian schoolboy. And you can see that the plants just grow through everything. We sit on that bench, and you sort of have to push them back through if you're wearing something light and you don't want pink stain all over you. I also went on holiday once for a couple of weeks, and there was 3 foot of rose growing in through the galleried hall when I came back through some tiny hole that it had found to make its way into the house. When you've got a house that dates back to 1390, there are all sorts of tiny holes for things to find their way through. This is the path, done a double. This is the path running along the top of the wall above the main lawn. Again, a then and now shot. And this is the courtyard. If you remember the photo I showed you at the beginning of the entrance, so that's just through the doorway here. And if you look on the left, you can see the iron grille here, and there it is, still there today, hanging on. And this is the very modest lady who peers through the iron grille, surrounded by Clematis armandii and its heavenly scent. Children have always featured in the garden, and here we have Ben and Nigel in the swimming pool. although I should mention that they didn't actually live in the house. They lived in the cottage next door with Nanny. And that's despite the house having 8 bedrooms. There wasn't room for Ben and Nigel. And they came down to Longbourn to see Mummy and Daddy at about 6 p.m. every day. I think it's quite a fantastic idea. The closest I've got to it is my approach to lockdown homeschooling with 8 chickens and an electric fence. Here we have the old apple orchard, now a vegetable patch. This is perhaps the biggest difference in the garden because Vita didn't have a vegetable patch. But when we bought the house, there was a vegetable patch already there. And we rather loved it and we enjoy it. We do grow our own veg. And I must say, having a greenhouse is a huge benefit to a garden of this size. So I love the greenhouse. It also means when it's raining, there's somewhere you can go and do lots of jobs. And it really helps to expand that planting season and the flowering plant season throughout the year. Also, who wouldn't want to eat fresh broad beans? Now this is the view up to the rose walk with the box parterres on either side, and you can see they're all narrow on the left and they've gotten a bit flatter on the right. The old rose walk actually collapsed and we've just had it rebuilt by a fantastic local blacksmith, Lawrence Coleman. It's got roses coming up it and clematis, and we've put step-over apples at the base, which I'm very excited about because I've always wanted to have step-over apples, and now I've finally got them, and I think it's going to be absolutely amazing once it's covered. Obviously it looks a little bit bare at the moment. This is a view from the White Garden, looking suitably rustic and overgrown, both then and now. And here, looking up from the swimming pond, you can see how the yews have grown to such an extent that they now block the view. The walls of the terraces are also a big feature of the garden. There's lots of walls. And here's Vita with her lovely dogs and our lovely dog Lasker's on the right. So that's the last of the old photographs, and actually you can just see on the old photograph, and if you can see it clearly enough on the screen, but you can see the tiny yew saplings that Vita planted. So this is the last of the old photographs, but now I'm going to take you through the garden as how it is now. So this is one of Annie Guilfoyle's images, and I love the shadows cast by the yews. Vita and Harold were clearly sort of amateur gardeners, and I've often wondered why they did create something quite so huge. Money was tight, but Vita's scale was always big, and I expect that has something to do with growing up at Knoll. I also had a bit of a light bulb moment when I read a letter from Vita to Harold just after she planted those tiny yew saplings that we just saw, and she wrote, "They will look silly at first, but when we are a handful of grey ashes, they will bring charabancs of tourists from London." Vita was creating something that she wanted to leave behind, just like all the portraits of those ancestors in the home that she would never inherit. Even in the winter, the yews in the box continue to provide a beautiful framework. And here again, looking from the top lawn back at the house, you can still see the importance of that structure. Annie, is this clicking through okay? There's not a time lag.
It's beautiful, and I'm not chipping in because, as always, I'm spellbound by this place. I just love it. Yeah, no, it's all wonderful. Thank you.
It's great.
Okay, great.
Working perfectly.
Yeah, it's great. So I just wondered if I might not be talking to the right image.
No, you're good. You're great.
Okay, lovely.
And we're still here.
And you're still, yes, yeah, I'm not just talking to myself. That's also good to know.
It's all spellbound, absolutely.
Oh, lovely. So here, this is taken from the White Garden, and it's looking again back over, and again you can just see all that structure and the beauty of having a mature garden. You have that instant sort of foil for anything that you plant. Oh, that's the White Garden, in fact, as it was in this spring, just a few weeks ago. Yeah, we actually think it wasn't white when Vita lived here. We think it was purple and orange. And there certainly seem to be a lot of purple and orange plants that self-sow in there, particularly violets, which always makes me giggle because it's just outside Vita's study and just below her bedroom. And that's a view from the terrace. That's taken by a good friend of mine, actually, Durian de Monk. It's a lovely photo. And this one's from behind the parterre. The yews, again, are there. They're just a constant presence in the garden, like guardians. And this beautiful photograph by Claire Takacs, taken just off centre at the bottom of the rose walk. If it was taken from the centre, you'd see that even the north-south axis isn't completely straight. In fact, there is not a single straight line in the garden. Even the box parterres are not straight. And it does make cutting hedges really challenging because you've got no true line to work from. So you sort of have to eyeball things and try and get it right. And I suspect actually nothing straight because of how it grew organically and how, as amateur gardeners and novices, they weren't sort of laying it out formally. They would just go, we'll do this bit this weekend or this bit this week. And it was piecemeal, added on. And it's all wobbly, like the house. I love the electric blue of this Veronica Craterlake blue in the foreground. Just setting off the house again with the ever-present yews. And then just like Sissinghurst, we've got a Rosa Banksii lutea, vigorous grower, but oh so beautiful with its popcorn flowers. I confess it is so vigorous that one year, in sort of desperation and a bit time limited, I did take the hedge cutters to it and did feel quite dreadful when I'd done it, but it survived. I haven't done it again. It survived. It didn't seem to mind, but I'm not sure I'd quite advise that treatment, but I was feeling slightly desperate at the time. The sun hits this end of the house first, and in this picture you can see on the left another common plant between here and Sissinghurst is the Pyrus salicifolium, which is on the right. And if I go to this one, this beautiful photo where you can see the light catching the branches of the weeping pear. And the inner pattern of the parterre was actually planted by Sir Brandon and Lady Sarah Goff, who lived here and carried out a really dedicated 20-year renovation of the garden. And we were very lucky we bought the house from them. So we bought the garden in very good and excellent condition. It had been lovingly looked after. And here's the terrace that Anne and Charles stood on when they made their decision to live here during their stay in England. It's been the site of many tea parties over the decades and the odd early morning cup of tea. A question I'm often asked actually is whether we bought Longbarn because of the house or the garden. And this photo is a great illustration of my answer. For me, the two are totally inseparable. The house wouldn't feel nearly so grounded or worth cleaning actually without the garden. And the garden would be incomplete without the backdrop of those ancient walls. So they're totally intertwined. So Brandon and Lady Sarah Goff also built the gravel garden at the back of the house. It's a lovely sun trap and adds a very special extra dimension to the garden. And here's an image of the sundial in the middle of it with a beautiful rambling rector at the back of it, again with wonderful scent. Next to the gravel garden is the spring glade. The garden has no definitive planting plan, so it's not like having a Gertrude Jekyll garden where you sort of know exactly where everything was and what the plan was. I mean, Vita was very much learning and experimenting, and nothing was sort of heavily documented, which is a blessing, I think, for us. We don't feel obligated to plant only what she could access at the time, but we do try and sort of garden with her ethos. And I think that's illustrated here by the words cram, cram, cram. The rose garden is an area that I occasionally think we should turn it back into the tennis court that it was when Vita lived here. I quite often have that thought when I'm actually weeding it. But when the roses are out and you can smell them, I think I would just miss them too much. In fact, even in the winter, the rose garden is very beautiful. Then this is the path leading up from the swimming pond into the orchard. And this whole area, including actually the swimming pond, is left as meadow apart from the area just around the pond. And it's cut and raked off at the end of August. Thanks to Great Dixter, we've now got yellow rattle in it. And thanks to Lady Sarah Goff, there's an ever-expanding colony of early purple orchids. It really is a truly magical area of the garden. Not least in spring when there's a sea of snake's head fritillaries. they're not long lived from their flowering period, but they are absolutely stunning when they're out. And they're followed by, we've got cowslips. I mean, lots of cow parsley at the moment. I'm covered in cow parsley. It's like fairyland. And then it moves on through to this. It's all equally beautiful. And we love it so much, actually, that we're a little bit lazy about mowing the banks around the house, and we leave quite a lot of areas wild. The colours are constantly changing. And I think, we go really from yellows and whites of aranthus and snowdrops and daffodils to pinks and blues of roses and nigella to these rich autumn colours. I think, Annie, you took this picture, didn't you?
I did. This is from Vita's bedroom. It's always such a treat when I come to Longbarn and Rebecca says, would you like to stay in Vita's room or one of the other rooms? And of course, she knows the answer. It's such a joy to wake up and see this out of the window. It just makes my heart leap, really, every time I see it.
Well, last time you were here, it was just before lockdown.
Yeah. It
was the 9th of March. I think we'd consumed most of the bottle of wine. And then you went up to bed and then you reappeared and you said, it's Vita's birthday and I'm staying in her bedroom.
I know, I was desperate for her to come and visit, but it was, I know very well it was Vita's birthday because she shared her birthday with my mum and a very good friend of mine too. So the 9th of March is firmly implanted in my head. But then I suddenly realised that I'd forgotten to send a birthday card to my friend whose birthday it was. So I felt guilty, but also excited and just desperate for Vita to show her face. But she didn't, sadly.
Oh, no, I haven't met her either. So in this spring, we decided to mix things up a little bit and we went for quite a bold, the picture doesn't do it justice, but a bold orange and purple theme down in the Dutch beds. And I've got a close-up here of our little scheme. We had ballerina, and I think that's Lasting Love, and there's Purple Dream in the background, and a whole selection of erysimums, a lot of which were actually eaten by the local vole population, which was a little bit distressing. But there we go, such is life, you have to share your garden with nature. After all that colour, it's nice to have a little bit of green. Here's the formal pond with agapanthus and alchemilla mollis, lots and lots of alchemilla mollis. My husband gets a bit distressed sometimes. He finds that as a Scandinavian, he likes it all to be a bit sort of cleaner than this. And I quite like the abundance of drowning in alchemilla mollis. And he's like, oh, I think we need to take some of this out. And just below the main lawn, we're back to pinks and blues. And then to Vita's Cretan beds, which are just below the main terrace, and they run the length of that long walk. There's lots of little gems in here. We've got Talbagia, red hypoxis, and that stunning alpine aquilegia. Walls are everywhere in the garden, and they provide an extra dimension. And I love what grows in them. We do stuff quite a few things in with a bit of a wish and a prayer. They don't always survive. And then some things arrive mysteriously and you're not quite sure how they got there. But it's always fun to see what will survive and thrive in a wall against all odds. And if you don't have a wall, you can always plant one of those. That lives on my terrace. And in the winter, I just turn the base of it upside down so it doesn't sit in water. One ubiquitous plant in the garden is the Rigerum carvinskianus, or the Spanish daisy. It just grows everywhere. It grows up the steps. There we go, the steps, yeah, and on the walls, that's the walls, and it grows up the steps. And Longbarn wouldn't feel the same without its softening influence. For me, the garden is brimming with atmosphere, and Vita and Harold have brought so much pleasure to those that have lived here, and many of those that have visited. And I think it's all summed up by Anne Morrow Lindbergh's diary entry before she left the house. She encapsulates its gift in what she's written here. And now you're all going to laugh because I can't read it because I've got pictures of you all over it.
Do you want me to read it?
You read it for me, Annie, yeah.
I look back at the house glowing in the evening light, its pinky red bricks, its tawny roof, the flowers climbing over the walls. I try to impress it on my memory. In the years before us, we will need this place, or need this piece, sorry. Yeah.
Lovely. So there we go. So now it's just for me to thank everybody who shared their images with me, so I could put them in this PowerPoint, and I've got their names up here.
Do you want to come back to us and so we can
and I'll come back to you. So I'll just show you that slide, and also to thank my gardeners who keep the garden going, and who work with me and who teach me stuff, and it's just great. So thank you very much to Anna, Russell, and Andy. That's lovely.
And your contact details are on there for people who want to
my
visit.
contact details are on there too.
Yeah, very good.
Well, thank you. That was beautiful. That was lovely.
Absolutely
Now,
beautiful.
I need to work out where my cursor is so I can stop share.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's okay.
There we go. I'm back.
I mean, Rebecca, I know that story really well. I've heard it so many times, and yet every time you go through it and you show those pictures, it's such a beautiful, wonderful, and important story. And I think, I know that the images you were showing were just divine, and and obviously with Claire Takash's photos and your photos, but I want to say that I think it's the most atmospheric garden I've ever been into, and for me, even much more so than Sissinghurst, it's on a very personal and very intimate scale. I find that wonderful sort of intimacy, and the fact that there are so many plants that we see then at Sissinghurst, like the pyrus, and we see the sort of they're cutting their teeth on this garden, and it's amazing to think that they didn't know anything about gardening when they bought this house, and that this is where they learned to garden. It's just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We've got some comments and some questions.
One I think is particularly interesting from Anne Peckham, asking how strict are you with the planting given that it's listed, and she's interested to know whether there's advisors or whether you have to have any changes agreed with anybody, and that whole business of gardens being listed is something perhaps you should explain a little bit more about.
Yeah, so the listing of the garden and how we've approached that is very much that it's something that I think gardens are often listed to protect them, to protect them from development that might go on around them and affect them, and to protect hard landscaping. So there is no obligation to keep particular plants or particular planting for very obvious reasons, actually. For instance, if you've got box blight really badly, you simply might have to give up and grub out your box. You would be fighting a very, very expensive and completely worthless and losing battle to replant it or keep putting it back in. So it's much more about protecting the garden from development and protecting the hard landscaping and the layout. So if I was to decide that instead of having terraces, I'd have a giant slope again, I think somebody might have something to say.
Yes. The whole issue of how you list gardens is a difficult one, because I remember having discussions with Beth Chattery, in fact, many years ago, or people who knew Beth about what would happen there, because there is no statutory obligation to protect planting, and yet, of course, the character of many gardens is entirely down to the planting. So the listing is essentially about architecture rather than planting. But no, that was very useful to have that clarified.
There's so many lovely comments, and also about how your delivery was, the images were beautiful, but also your story and the way you delivered it. There's lots of people saying thank you very much, and what a beautiful, stunning story, and also people saying it's definitely now on their to visit list. Part of Annie Peckham's question also was that if you fell in love with a plant, do you have to resist planting it? I think you sort of answered that, really, didn't you? I don't. I mean, no, I have some quite bizarre things in the garden, really, because I'm sort of a bit of a Dixter stalker, as I'm sure quite a lot of people on this chat are. I love Great Dixter. I love a little bit of the anarchy that goes on down there. And it creeps in. It just simply does creep in here. If I love a plant, I will put it in the garden, and that's going back to the idea of gardening in Vita's ethos, because she did the same thing. She wrote about it in her letters. She wrote about it in her notes. She'd go somewhere, see something, and just totally fall in love with it. And
and sort of carry it around the garden and try and work out where the best place for it was, and say, yeah, no, it's going there, move it around, and we do that too. So yes, I don't feel restricted in that way at all.
And you've had conversations with Sissinghurst, haven't you, over the years, with delving into their archives and them delving into your archives. So there's been a sort of nice swapping of information. Yeah, no,
it's incredible, and they have the family albums, and they are truly amazing and wonderful, and pages and pages of photographs of the garden and of their sort of intimate family setting, and it is tremendous fun, and it is amazing the number of things that were moved sort of off the building here or from the grounds, and you now see them in Sissinghurst. It's really
and lovely. Any chance of claiming them back?
Yeah, well, that's like, it's kind of like Elgin marbles. Maybe I should have a sort of some sort of petition that I get people to sign, and we can lobby. I don't think the thing I really love are those blue gates. I just they go missing from Sissinghurst. You know where they are.
Yes. And a question about your background, whether you basically learnt on the job or whether you arrived with some horticultural training.
Yeah, no, I learnt on the job. My background is very boring, an economics degree, followed by a law degree, followed by practicing as a solicitor, followed by a sense of drowning, followed by I was always very keen. In fact, when I left my first legal job, my leaving gift was loads of books on gardening. So it was clearly something I talked about a lot, and I never had the time to do a course. And actually, then when we bought this house and realised it was going to be my job, I sort of thought, I'll sign up, I'll do this course, that course, and the other. And of course, I was so busy and there was so much to do that I ended up very much learning from the people who came to visit, and I still learn from people who come to visit. That's one of the great things, is that experts come and visit gardens, and they are a fount of sort of knowledge. So I pick that a lot, and I have done the art and craft of gardening course down at Dixter, which was brilliant and not hugely time consuming, at one day a month. So, and Caroline asked how much help you have in the garden. So do you describe on how you? Yeah, I have. So I pay for 7 days of labour, is the kind of the most direct way I can describe it. So I have a head gardener who comes 3 days a week, a groundsman who comes 3 days a week, and then another gardener who comes 1 day a week. And then on top of that, I do have a volunteer, the lovely Penny, and she comes a sort of a morning a week, depending. She's not coming at the moment for obvious reasons. And that's obviously a flexible time, and that's changed. Sometimes I'll have more volunteers or people who are training and they want to have work experience here, and I have on and off. I have a university student who's still at uni actually, and he's good young strong labour when we've got a big digging job to do. And of course, I keep saying to you, come on, Rebecca, the book, you've got to write the book. Because from the Lindberghs and Sidney Bernstein up to present day, really, the house has always been occupied, whether it's been owned or rented, by extraordinary people. I mean, nobody's sort of normal in the wrong sense of the word. Thank you, Annie. Extraordinary people have always lived there. So there's so much to the history of Longbarn, isn't there? Post Vita and Harold, actually, even. It's just it's been the most extraordinary place. There's something about it, isn't there? Yeah, no, it is. It is an amazing place, and it does. And there's something Lars always says to me, actually, when we have visitors, because he knows how much I enjoy it when we do tours, because we don't tire of them, because we don't do hundreds. And he'll always say to me, "Any criers?" And I'll say, "Oh, no, not today, not today." Or I'll say, "Oh yes, there was one. She was lovely." Yeah, it does move. The garden does move people to tears, and that's remarkable. And that's not because it's garden to perfection in any way, shape, or form. We're a limited workforce, so it's plenty weedy. It does have this amazing atmosphere that gets under your skin, and it's really only if you're unfortunate enough to visit it on a sort of howling gale and it's pouring with rain. But if you visit it on a nice day, it will somehow capture you in some
Yeah,
way. It's a magical place. But then so is Sissinghurst. If you see Sissinghurst without hordes of tourists, if you're lucky enough to get in there at dawn or dusk, it's absolutely sort of transformative as a place, really. And that is the power of Vita and Harold.
I know you tell a lovely story about Troy Scott-Smith, who was the last head gardener at Sissinghurst, coming to visit Longbarn, asking if he could come to visit Longbarn on his own birthday as a treat.
Yes, he did. That was last year. I got a text in the morning saying, "Rebecca, it's my birthday today. Can I come and have tea at Longbarn?"
that just says it all, really, doesn't it?
So he did. He came with his wife and sat and had a cup of tea. Yeah.
Rebecca, it's been wonderful, and I know you've put a lot of work into this presentation, and it's just, I mean, always.
It's my first ever PowerPoint presentation.
Nobody would know it. It's just absolutely beautiful, and the images, the story, the history, those wonderful old photographs. I mean, those children on that terrace. I mean, that just breaks your heart, doesn't it? And if you look at closely, you see their little faces at the windows. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, lots of very appreciative comments coming in. Capital letters, absolutely fabulous. Great.
Definitely a book. Definitely a book. Yeah. And I know who is it over? Jenny Harris, who's over on the west coast of the States, says, "What a lovely way to start the day for us. Beautiful." So listen, thank you so much. It's been a joy, and I can't wait to wake up in Vita's bedroom again and see that wonderful view.
Lovely.
Hope it happens soon.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, and also thank you again, guys, for all the talks. They're brilliant. They're keeping us all sane.
Oh, pleasure, absolute pleasure. Well, stay safe and keep the garden looking wonderful, and hope to see you very soon.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, take care. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.